Good morning. I am Stephanie Mandeville, NEA Rhode Island Communications Director. Today is August 3rd, and this is episode 15 of Ask Larry and Bob, and I am joined this morning, as I am every week, with Larry Purtill, NEA Rhode Island President, and Bob Walsh, NEA Rhode Island Executive Director. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, Stephanie.
How are we doing? Lots of news happening.
There is a lot of news.
There is. Let's just kick it off as we normally do by talking about Amy Mullen and the town of Tiverton. Do we have an update?
We do have an update. For the first 14 episodes of Ask Larry and Bob, I told you what I thought about the case. But today, Stephanie's going to tell you what the judge thought about the case. Take it away, Stephanie, from the actual judge's opinion last Friday.
This is Judge McConnell speaking. I'm going to grant the preliminary injunction and order that Ms. Mullen be restored as a teacher until further notice. I believe the 4 criteria for the issuing of an injunction have been clearly and unquestionably met. There is no doubt in the court's mind on the issue of likelihood of success on the merits that Ms. Mullen was retaliated against because of her protected First Amendment speech. The court believes, and will write further in its opinion in the motion to dismiss, that in speaking at the meeting and in replying on Facebook, she was speaking as a private citizen as the law defines that, and that that speech was clearly protected speech. And further on, Judge McConnell says, and the court finds that further keeping her from being an employee, allowing her complete First Amendment rights, would produce irreparable harm. The equities of balance are clearly in the plaintiff's favor. 1, because her First Amendment rights won't be violated any longer, but also because of the fact that for 20 some odd years, this woman devoted herself to the children of a special education class, and never once was her teaching called into question. In fact, it's been nothing but complimented. And to allow the equities favor her ability to get back to doing her duties teaching and representing the teachers, the equities are clear to the court. And finally, the public interest would not be adversely affected by an injunction here. There is no question raised that this woman was anything other than an exemplar teacher. The public interest is well served by getting her back into the classroom, and further, best served by letting her fully and completely exercise her First Amendment rights as union president. So the court's going to grant the preliminary injunction.
So there you have it. Amy is back. As we have said since this case has started, this was a case about her First Amendment rights as a union leader being violated by the superintendent and the school committee, and the judge saw what we saw. I would urge the school committee and the superintendent to settle all the remaining outstanding issues in this case and not waste another dime of taxpayers' money. And if they have any integrity at all, they will also apologize to Amy, her family, her members, her students, and the entire Tiverton community. So hopefully, the only time we'll reference this again is when all the other issues have been resolved. If not, we'll be back, and please rest assured, when the union has your back, they have your back.
Absolutely.
I think, exhibit number 1, why people need unions, and the outrage to think that, especially during this time, that a superintendent and a school committee fired a teacher for one reason only, because she was union president. Not anything to do with teaching. And by the way, when she wasn't in her classroom, as Bob alluded to, her students were the ones who suffered. The parents of those students were the ones that suffered. They were willing to do that, to harm students in that district, because they wanted to get back at her because she stood up for her members. Now is never the right time, but now especially with everything we're going through. That school committee and that superintendent need to work with Amy and the teachers and staff of that district as we talk about reopening in schools to make sure it's a success. Because quite frankly, their behavior shows. If I was a parent in Tiverton, I wouldn't be too confident about their reopening plan based on their actions. They need to get it together, and they do need to apologize to Amy for attacking her and putting her through this because of her violating her First Amendment rights, and especially for being a union president. We weren't going to let it stand, and it did.
Congratulations to Amy.
Yes. And to everyone who worked on it, and to the attorneys. And
Yeah, and Liz Winkes from
attorneys
Gursky
and staff.
Haynes was our, Liz was our lead outside attorney, ably assisted by everyone who's ever worn a legal hat for us. Jennifer Azevedo, our deputy executive director, and John DeCubelos, our general counsel, and John Leidecker. Gone but not forgotten, retired but was still helping with this case, and Leslie Florio was the UNICEF director. It was a wonderful team effort. Liz had an excellent roundtable to inform her on these, and she did a remarkably wonderful job in court before Judge McConnell. So lots of commendations to go around, as well as all the union folks throughout the state, everybody on our staff, our NEARI leadership and membership who were there for Amy when she needed them the most. That's what unions are.
That's right. All right, let's talk about, we are not going to do Ask Larry and Bob next Monday as we normally do, with great purpose. We are going to be doing Ask Larry and Bob live for all our members. So this is, for all our members watching this, this is a save the date for August 12th at 7 p.m. And the registration for that Ask Larry and Bob Live is going to go out today, and you'll find that in your emails. I'm excited about this because this is an opportunity for us to speak directly to our members with them right there, and they're going to hear the answers to their questions, and we're also going to have a few member spotlights sprinkled throughout. Looking forward to this.
Yes.
The series has been running so long, they made it into a movie.
And get reopening right, and maybe we won't need a sequel.
Amen.
Oh, there's a segue. So let's talk about the current landscape. Schools across the country are already opening their doors to less than stellar results. In Indiana, a student was sent home on the first day with symptoms, not before he sat in classes and walked the halls. In Mississippi, a student tested positive after the first week of classes. And in Georgia, in addition to the hundreds of kids who were infected at sleepaway camp back in June, their largest school district has now confirmed 260 employees have tested positive or have been exposed. That's according to CNN this morning. Here in Rhode Island, Scott McKay, reporter with the Public's Radio, has a fantastic commentary piece today titled "Time to Tap the Brakes on In-Person School Reopening." In addition to quoting you, Bob, as saying there is no way we're doing a full reopening, Scott writes, quote, "Rhode Island's Education Commissioner Angelica Infante Green has called planning for an in-person return a nightmare. Well, perhaps education bureaucrats should have spent more time this summer figuring out how to make distance learning better than planning for an all-out return," end quote. Thoughts?
Well, I think one of the things, and we have worked with, and we'll continue to work, obviously, with the governor's staff and the commissioner and RIDE, because we want to get this right and work with our locals, work with the AFT, work with superintendents. But it's becoming more and more clear that we are not going to reopen completely in-person learning. The fact that both the governor and the commissioner have said that parents will be able to choose whether they want in-person or distance learning, right there we know we're not going to fully reopen. So I think if we, if we're going to give parents a choice, and obviously our members need that choice as well going forward. I think your quote, Stephanie, the other day in the Providence Journal was, we need to start looking at distance learning now and how to phase back in as we go along. I'm still concerned about special needs students, obviously, students with trauma, how we get kindergarten teachers to meet their students, because you can't send kindergarten kids start with distance learning, they've never met their teacher. But we got to get and do this right. The other thing that, as you said about growing numbers, I just saw an article over the weekend where we're very close now to where Connecticut may put Rhode Island on the warning list that if you come from Rhode Island into Connecticut, you have to quarantine, et cetera. We'd be the only New England state. The Northeast has done pretty well, but numbers are starting to climb in Rhode Island, and it's getting, we only have 4 weeks to go. So I think we need to plan, protect everyone. And right now it seems like distance learning phasing in is the best way to go.
Well, distance learning to start is the likely outcome of all of this, and then we'll figure out what a phase-in looks like. We've been remarkably patient, which is causing some frustration with the subset of our members in saying, let's let the folks who are officially in charge of these decisions get to the right place. And one of the reasons for that is the governor showed extraordinary leadership at the beginning of this crisis and making a bold decision, which, if you remember, was very controversial, shutting down all the schools. People said, oh, don't do that. Why do you need to do that? You're overreacting. It was the correct reaction at the time. Now, obviously, the governor and the commissioner and anyone else has stated that they have the goal of reopening the schools fully. We do too. So now we're just arguing or debating or discussing when that is appropriate. And through no fault of the governor's, all the chickens have come home to roost. Air quality in the schools alone becomes a limiting factor that may not allow us to open on a timely basis until there's a vaccine. As Larry said, once the commissioner announced parents would have choice, we have taken full reopening off the table. That's a good thing. That should be a relief to everybody and take one concern off the table. So now the debate shifts to, is there a hybrid system that makes sense, or should we fully start with distance learning? If you haven't guessed that we have feelings about the answer to that question, you haven't really been paying attention to everything we've saying. We are letting the process play itself out. Anyone who asks our private opinion, and you've already figured out our opinion is, it's going to be remarkably difficult to start in any hybrid situation. Because of factors, again, not the governor's fault there aren't enough buses, not the governor's fault the air quality in some of our schools is so abysmal. You wouldn't let anybody in there, even in normal circumstances. We assume they haven't gone through their health and safety inspections for air quality as they're supposed to, because everybody at Department of Health has been working on the much bigger crisis of COVID and contact tracing and everything else. And that's just one of the myriad of issues that become limiting factors in this. The federal government has not yet approved the money. The personal protective equipment is not yet available. Some of the plans, and we'll get to these in the Q&A, I know, have things that just are not acceptable. We're not going to have the kids clean the rooms. We're not going to have the teachers clean the rooms. We're going to have qualified professionals clean the rooms. We're not going to take the risk. Nonetheless, we hope that, again, as I said a few weeks ago, to be standing in lockstep with our leadership of the state, the governor, the Department of Health, the Department of Education, and say, here's the smart thing to do if we're not ready. Let's start in a way that is safest for everybody. Let's not force a difficult choice. Saying that parents will have a choice puts parents in an awful position. You're going to send your kids in because you feel that you have no choice economically. And let's also be painfully honest about this. A subset of those parents, and I'll get in trouble for saying it, are the same idiots that are at the ice cream store screaming they shouldn't have to wear a mask or loudly pontificating that it's all a hoax. And they're going to send their kids into a situation without understanding the risk. The vast majority of our parents, the vast majority of our members, the vast majority of the public get this is a really serious crisis. But we're not going to let all those other risks prevail. You saw some of the pictures over the weekend of people gathering too close together in outdoor settings even, but still too close together. And that R number, that magic transmission number, is increasing in Rhode Island, not decreasing. You know, we will have to figure out how to meet all our students in some form or fashion so that the teachers get to see them as individuals, even if it's the equivalent of parent conferences spread over the first month of a otherwise closed system. And there's a lot of work to do, but it's time to start thinking about what that work looks like. Again, once they said that parents would have a choice, we've ruled out full reopening. So let's be smart about the rest of it too. So that's where we are.
And we still have the challenge of testing. The testing turnaround, you certainly it can't go back until that time has come down to 24 hours, hopefully. And flexibility's got to be, we've been saying that for 5 months now, but the commissioner said the other day about flexibility on, possibly waiving the 180 days down to 170. One of the things I've suggested is we don't need 330 instructional hours per week per se to start off with. There are a lot of things we can do to make this easier, not only on students and teachers and staff, but also on parents. We're going to have to remember the quicker we can get to what we're going to do and give some time for planning, parents are going to have to plan as well. And that's a huge undertaking for parents who are going to have to figure out, especially with younger students, childcare, work situation, etc. And it really hits home with students who are living in poverty. So the sooner we can get to planning, the better.
Massachusetts had a pretty good initial approach. They're not done yet. There's still a lot of conversations going on, but a 10-day delay a game, 170-day school year instead of 180. That'll buy us 2 more weeks. The professionals, teachers and ed support professionals can get together, whatever the starting date is. Maybe we push everything back a week till after Labor Day. For the next 2 weeks, just bring in the professionals and then start a 170-day school year, probably with almost full distance learning. And that'll push everything back so that if we get the vaccine availability on a timely basis, we'll have more time for the return to school portion of it sometime in 2021. That's just the reality of it. This isn't, we can't wish this problem away. You can't wish it away.
Well, what you keep saying, Bob, is time. Having time.
We need more time. We need more time.
And I said this off camera, that imagine the scenario of the governor coming out today or this week to say, all of the plans are in, and we've made the determination that full distance learning is what makes the most sense. And so we're going to do that from August 31st through September 30th. And that gives every sector of this state a month to get ready. It gives districts a chance to get ready and make sure that each family has adequate Wi-Fi, that the kids have Chromebooks. The parents can then get ready with their employers, which is something we have really not heard enough about. The governor and the commissioner have been calling for patience and flexibility. We've been calling for patience and flexibility with our members. When are we going to call on employers to have patience and flexibility for their employees to work from home because of distance learning? And another bit that you touched on, Larry, is childcare. This is a concern, not just to have the time for planning, but what happens when we do a hybrid, if we go back to a hybrid, and you have kids who are in pods who are then going home to caretakers who are in high-risk groups, grandparents, etc. Are we going to have to?
One physician has recommended that in a back-to-school scenario, that takes grandparents and aunts and uncles and immunocompromised folks out of the caregiver equation. So if you are a parent who was relying on grandparents for, not only relying on them to help with caring for your children, but just expecting to see them on the weekends, and that's suddenly off the table, you will see droves of parents electing not to send their kids back to school, and the system collapses upon itself.
We haven't heard anything about that. We did hear from Dr. Burks, I think, over the weekend, who said if you're living in multi-generational homes, you should consider wearing a mask in your house.
And when your parents, and I think it's right to say to parents, you've got the choice, but the first blip on the screen will make significantly more folks elect the choice. I saw this happen in school. That's it. We're pulling the kid out. The teacher's not allowed to enforce that the other kid should wear a mask. That kid took off their mask. All right, I'm pulling my child out of school because I heard that story. I take a chance. I mean, it was a noble effort, man. I mean, they worked hard on this. It just, the practicalities are getting more and more and more absurd. So it's okay.
Well, as you both have said repeatedly, we're going to need these plans at some point, all of these plans. So great getting them in place and all of that. But it's time. you know, we need to be giving people enough time to prepare.
And
And
this
every-
new concept, by the way, that we haven't had a chance to react to because it came up after last week's show of some communities could be open and some could be closed. No, not in Rhode Island. I mean, if you're saying that community X is open and community Y is closed, what about all the teachers from community Y that teach in community X? Or the service delivery person who lives in community Y that delivers school supplies to community X? The Rhode Island is too small.
Yeah.
You know, our fate is linked in this state. We did humorously observe, you know, I suppose you could stop the ferry running to Block Island and they could do it, or take down the bridges in Jamestown. But the practical matter is we are all in this together. And then you still get to the so what? So one district races ahead of the others. To what purpose? The whole country is going to be slowed down from an academic standpoint to some extent until this situation is resolved. And that's just okay. You know, because the whole world.
Right. If you want to prioritize public education, then you need to prioritize public education. That means the proper funding in place to remedy the issues that we had before March 13th hit. Start there.
Yeah, and there are a lot of them.
And there are a lot of them. And those vary district to district, which is concerning.
I know we have questions. I know we've
We
answered
do.
a lot of questions as part of this conversation. So what have we got on the docket?
We've got, let's see. We have Paula in East Providence who says, first of all, thank you for doing this show. It has been very informative. Thank you, Paula. Her concern is regarding social and emotional issues of students. She writes, the commissioner talks about the social emotional impact that distance learning had on students. But my concern is if students return to school with all the changes and restrictions in a classroom and school environment, that will also create additional social emotional issues. There's been very little planning for that. I can only speak on the plan my district submitted to the state, and there was no concrete plan to prepare students and families so that they can make an informed decision on returning to school. There's really no question here. She's just,
No,
explaining
but
No, it's a good point.
it is a good point. Yep.
it also speaks to what people haven't thought about and seen yet. If, again, react as a parent. Your child comes home from their first day of elementary school and they say, how was it? They said, well, it was weird compared to last year because there's no pictures on the wall. They took the beanbag chair out of the corner. The teacher's bookcase is gone. They have all the desks locked in 6 feet apart from each other. They can't run the fans. They're not allowed to, so it was hot. I had to wear a mask the whole time. And these are all, the sensible rules thing, but it was kind of sad. It was like being in a cell. And so Paul is right. There's kind of a social emotional impact of going to, a cinder block room without decoration or ventilation.
That's just environment that you're talking about. What happens when their classmate or their teacher gets sick? Or someone in their family becomes sick. There are issues there that are significant.
No, she raises a terrific issue because, excuse me, we have talked about social emotional concerns. We know that students being home, we know some of the trauma that's being caused, and one of the reasons for wanting to get students back to school. So if we do go distance learning, we need to address that and make sure those are covered. We also need to address just what we've been talking about the last 2 minutes, students coming back into school, that trauma. And one of the things I did talk with the governor about last week, and I know she's committed to and has been for the past couple of years, is getting more mental health professionals into the schools, no matter. And now with this, we need more professionals in the school helping students. And if we don't go back, we're going to need them available to help students for all the issues that we've been talking about. So yeah, mental health, emotional, social concerns, those all need to be addressed. We need more people addressing them, whether we go distance learning, back to school, or both. They have to be in the plans.
She also mentions families really don't have a complete idea of what you outlined, Bob, of what it would actually be like. I did see Manatee County, Florida. People can Google that. They did put their a video up of what it would be like going back to school, and it's shocking. It's shocking.
I said it. I've been saying it for a few weeks, and it's, you know, people kind of laugh at it. Wow, get them to do that. We should take people who are making these decisions, put them on a school bus, put them in those rooms for 6 or 7 hours. Go to lunch having to wear your mask or eating in the classroom. Sit in a classroom with no windows and no fans. I mean, talk about ventilation concerns. People need to experience that, and firsthand is the way to do it. So whether they do it by video is even better when you have to do it in person. You're sitting there sweating like crazy wearing the mask. But people need to, Bob's point's right, people need to understand what they're sending their students back to. And as we talk to our members and talk to parents, ventilation has been a major concern for years now, and it's really, I think Bob said earlier, the chicken's coming home to roost on that one.
And if you're truly going to be adding the element of taking everyone's temperature every day on top of it, plus the mask wearing we already discussed, plus possibly having every student tested, there's a lot of support for having every student tested before they even are allowed to enter the building. There's a lot of trauma associated with all of that. And every absence is going to cause some, oh, they're out sick today. Do they have the disease? I mean, you gotta, there's a lot to unpack in this equation. And it's not fear-mongering. It's just a practical look at the whole picture that helps us get to what might be the only logical conclusion in the short term.
We've spent a lot of time highlighting things, but not connecting those dots. And I say us, meaning the state. And that's concerning, because now, like we're talking about, yeah, we've talked about social emotional learning, social emotional supports needed, or the impact, excuse me, when it was distance learning. There's a significant impact going back, and all of those factors looking into that. Those 100 questions, one question that, there's 100 questions right behind it. You can say that about every single issue that this raises.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, well, and we're slow walking to the answer. We know that it's not a full reopening once they gave parental choice. So now let's be logical of the remaining parameters.
And useful of the remaining time. We have a concerned teacher, no district mentioned. This person is a high school teacher, and in their partial and limited plan, the number of students in the building would be reduced. However, the class sizes will be the same, with many 25 or greater according to our rosters, with possibly 3 to 5 classes at least 2 days a week, and classrooms filled with students who have mixed into their various other classes throughout the day. This will increase exposure, not only for the students, but for the teacher, and therefore their families and ours. How can this be considered a safe, stable?
It can't. That plan should be rejected. If that's not rejected, make yourself not anonymous and let us know, and we will raise a ruckus about it. But at face value, that plan does not meet even the simplest parameters of health and safety, and should be tossed out. How's that for a direct answer? I mean, that's silly. What were they thinking? Who submitted that plan?
Think about this. The whole idea of, say, cutting school population in half, if you have 600 students only sending 300, is to spread them out in all those remaining classrooms. Packing 25 kids back in the classroom, even though you cut the total population down, doesn't make any sense at all. It doesn't eliminate any possibility of contamination or spreading the disease. That's ridiculous.
We just reduced the social gathering number to 15 people who are theoretically related to each other. You're taking 25 people who aren't related to each other, that are essentially moving from one party to another, one mixed group of kids to a different mixed group of kids. Now that's very annoying that someone would submit a plan like that.
Yes, and hold that thought. We have another anonymous one that came in that says their plan for elementary music, art, and library teachers in my district is to continue seeing every student every week. That's hundreds of students each week. Those teachers will be going into each class with carts and being told that their accommodation is to remain 6 feet from each student. That is especially unrealistic with K1 and 2. How could RIDE approve this plan that creates such risk for those teachers and instability within the school?
I shouldn't laugh, but it is ridiculous on its face. So, I mean, just think about they're going to move a cart from room to room. They're going to move a physical object that could have contaminants on it from room to room. But the miracle is they're going to keep the cart at least 6 feet away from everybody. Well, it's going to be I think that's one of those puzzles that's impossible to complete, how to navigate that through the system. Maybe, you know, on the other hand, let's be charitable and say some of these plans were put together in such a ridiculous fashion, they knew they would be rejected to get to the inevitable conclusion that it's going to be distance learning. So in that case, bravo, superintendents, for putting in plans that were so patently ridiculous that they proved unworkable. That was being sarcastic for those folks who missed it.
I got
it. Some of those plans, you wonder if they just said, we give up, we'll just submit whatever we're doing, let them reject it and blame it on them. So, I
mean, and the point about the first and second graders is what hits home. I mean, if you, initially, if you said, okay, a group of 20 students, the teacher comes in, stays 6 feet apart, they music lesson or whatever, art class and et cetera, music, whatever, with K1, 2, you're not going to stay 6 feet apart, and you're going to have to pass out material. So it doesn't work. It might work in a really limited basis at a secondary level, where at some level, but it's not going to work.
No, at some point in a phased reopening, when the R number's down and we might be going back before there's full herd immunity and everyone's vaccinated, you know, in an interim plan, is there a possibility that kids at all levels are considered in pods that stay together and getting as much as we can for them? Yeah, that's possible. Of keeping kids in small groups together just to get them, you know, some real face time. But it's, once you start mixing and mingling, you've lost, I mean, it's just simple math. You've lost the whole impact of that. And anyone who's been listening to what the governor's saying about the social gathering, those rules, same rules have to apply to our students.
It's important to mention also that if parents are expecting to rely on aftercare, so after school care, if that's a situation where their aftercare provider picks up the child from school and brings them to another place, there is guidance that has been issued last week that the children that are picked up from one school cannot commingle with children from another school. So, for example, my daughter usually would get picked up, but there's only 1 or 2 other children from her school that then go to aftercare. So she would be in a pod with just those 3 kids, and that's it. No commingling.
Yeah, and it is unfair. We heard last week they were doing a comparative to childcare, but it's a different situation. Those are a small group of kids who are together among themselves every day with 1 or 2 caregivers in the equivalent of a pod. If you wanted to try and run the schools on that basis, you could start to figure it out. It's just we run out of people in space pretty quickly. But the comparative is not a valid comparison. And the higher ed, the guy for the professor or epidemiologist from Yale who was on last week didn't help the governor's cause. You know, he said he was perfectly fine, and then he did the thoughtful Yale professor thing and said, of course, I can, you know, put a plexiglass screen across the front of my room and separate from the college students. You know, I not too many college professors have had to go wade into the room to keep 2 kids apart who were getting into an altercation. That sadly is not the case in the K-12 schools.
Yeah. There's also an economic issue with that as well. If you consider talking about the aftercare providers again, they would have to have 2 certified teachers with that pod. If there's no bathroom in the room that the children are in, you have to have 2 teachers so that one can bring one child out to the bathroom, sanitize or do whatever they have to do, and then come back. I don't know a lot of aftercare providers that can afford to do that level of hiring that would be needed to do that.
The commissioner was
and
certainly
Bob-
right. The commissioner was certainly right last week when she said this is a nightmare.
Well,
It is a nightmare. But there's
extrapolate that onto
mitigation.
the public schools when you say, hey, you're going to let the kids go to the restroom? Well, of course we are. How do you know there's not a kid from another class in the restroom? Who's going to clean the restroom after every student?
After every kid. And
Oh,
Bob,
yeah.
you say you're talking about the Yale professor and K-12 altercations. It doesn't have to be an altercation. Imagine the kids getting reprimanded for being near each other all day long. Imagine the teacher having to do that, and imagine the kid having to hear that all day.
Right.
It's a
That goes
nightmare.
back to the social emotional. It's
Right.
I would say something that'll get me in trouble, and I'll say it just because, what are we, a charter school?
Oh, for God's sakes.
The kids will be seen and not heard and sit quietly at their desk staring straight forward and only absorb stuff so they can pass a standardized test. No, we're not like that. We're trying to have a much broader array of opportunities.
Well, to be truthful, the video from Manatee County, Florida, the children, the teachers are in full lab coat, gloves, face mask, face shield. All the students, and there weren't that many, in the classroom are distanced apart and masked and have learned hand signals so that the teacher can understand whether the kid is actually getting what is being taught.
I saw
Then
the
they-
video.
They
I
can't
saw-
have lunch.
It was just awful.
It is awful. I'm a
And they were
parent
having lunch
of
outside, which is great.
by themselves.
Yeah.
Right.
All
This is New
tables
England.
by themselves. You would have thought it was a parody video if they weren't trying to say it was a serious solution to the problem.
You can't have a buffet hot lunch line, so each child was handed their lunch in a clear plastic bag, and then they had to go eat it by themselves outside. This is what we're fighting for our kids to go back to.
Yeah, and the first,
And even if you thought that was a good idea, which I can't believe anyone does, who's going to pay for all that? Where's all the money for all that equipment coming from? And
where are the other children? There were only
Yeah.
6 or 7 children in that classroom. Where were the rest of them?
yeah, where are the rest of them? And we'd spend all that money for something that hopefully is going to go away in 6 months or change in 6 months. It goes back to the the camera in the classroom. We're spending all this money for a show that gets canceled in 6 months. If we're going to this might be the opportunity to say, hey, distance learning. We need to make sure every school has Wi-Fi. Every parent in a household in Rhode Island has it. That we start addressing some of the child care, health care, all those issues. Now may be the time to do that in the middle of all this, rather than let's spend tons of money so we can all be look like we come from a Back to the Future movie.
well, we've convinced ourselves. Let's hope government catches up to us.
I'm going to skip around because we do have specific member issues. So Nick in Burrillville wants to know, would it be discriminatory to require some teachers, K-5 for example, to return to classrooms while the 6 to 12 teachers stayed out? Is that throwing some teachers to a higher risk of exposure and not others?
Well, it wouldn't be actionably discriminatory. It would just be foolish and cause a lot of unrest among the teaching ranks for different rules to apply to different people. I mean, if the question is, could you sue somebody on it? I don't know. Could you grieve it? Probably. Would you agree to it? Why would we agree to something that puts 2 different classes of folks in that situation for reasons that aren't health related, right? I mean, the only reason you're doing that is the folks who are pushing to use schools as daycare, and the elementary kids need the presence for daycare, and that's just wrong. So the real answer I think we're looking for here, Nick, is that doesn't make a lot of sense now, does it? And we would be against it just because it doesn't pass that original test. No, well, actually, the real answer is the one we gave last week. If it's voluntary for students to attend, it should be voluntary for teachers. And the first wave back, whatever that looks like, should probably be done among teachers who are willing to be back with students who are willing to be back in a very limited fashion. That's the only fair way to do it, right? Still puts pressure that's unfair on people, so the decision mitigates towards full distance learning. But if you're going to do it at all, let's see where folks are. Not with a doctor's note, just what's my comfort level.
Carrie in Cumberland wants to know if teachers in other districts are being asked to clean classrooms. Our high school plan, so Cumberland's high school plan, not negotiated, has teachers cleaning desks and high-touch surfaces after every class. This appears to put teachers at an additional risk. Not to mention time-consuming. How would they?
It implies that there would be students rotating in and out after every class, which is against the whole idea of social distancing in pods. So it's silly at many levels. The teachers and the students should not be cleaning their own. Obviously, if you're doing an in-school lunch thing at some point and you provide sanitary stuff to the students, that's a different issue. But no, if we're asking, no, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Are there other districts that propose silly things? Probably. Should they be approved? No. To the extent they have to negotiate those things with us, would we disagree? Yes, we would disagree. It doesn't make any sense. Again, maybe it's a clever proposal knowing it'll be rejected. That was sarcasm again.
Yes, I read that.
I got it again.
Cumberland's full and partial in-person plans do not meet safety guidelines. RIDE did not object to them when they offered feedback. The majority of teachers want to return, but only if it can be done so safely. I'm going to say that again, because that goes for pretty much every member that we've encountered from K to 12. The majority of teachers want to return, but only if it can be done so safely. Even though they've been told safety will be a priority, actions like this leave them with fear and doubt. My only problem with this question is we don't know what she's referring to. We don't know the specifics of the plan that's...
Well, I can answer at the big level that RIDE is not in charge of looking at the health and safety part of the plans. That is the Department of Health that is in charge of that. RIDE has made it abundantly clear they have no expertise in that area. That would have to come from Department of Health. So RIDE can't approve the health and safety aspect because they don't have the expertise to do so. But we will take her at her word that the plans submitted are not appropriate for health and safety and therefore should be rejected.
And it goes back
to... But it wasn't rejected. She's saying it was approved.
Well, RIDE can't approve. RIDE cannot approve the health and safety aspect of any plan, so it was not approved.
Right. RIDE can only approve the educational part of it. Department of Health has to approve the health and safety. And it goes back to what we said last week. It can't be just one set of guidelines either. The CDC came up last week, and we know they've been watered down politically. So this can't be a political rationale or reason, and the Department of Health has to take a look at that. And if it's unsafe for students and teachers, it has to be rejected. And if it's not, and we still think it's unsafe for students, teachers, and staff, then we're going to be loud and clear about it, and people should not be returning to those buildings.
That's a good point, Larry. With the CDC guidelines, we were also due to have the Department of Health protocol playbook, which that was due July 16th, which we still don't have. So we're being asked to, as a parent, I'll put my parent hat on for a second again, but we're being asked to make decisions when we don't really have full information. Districts too. Districts are being asked to put something together. And my district is not an NEA district, but reading that plan, there are gaps. But the gaps in the plan are because they don't have the proper guidance and protocols in place yet. So we're making decisions without full information.
And I'm not going to blame the Department of Health for that, because
I'm not blaming anybody. It's just a fact.
I know, but that's the whole point. I don't want to be held accountable for things I might have said a month or two ago, because 2 months ago things looked a lot different. The Northeast was doing very well. Rhode Island's numbers were down, and it looked like, yes, maybe some students could get back to school. Maybe some on some day, some on another. But as we're seeing with parental concerns and rising numbers and issues, none of that's going to work. So, it changes almost daily, and that's the problem. Has always been the problem. And the the one thing I think we just have to keep paying attention to is that rising R number. If that continues to rise, and I don't think there's anything you can do. Again, we don't have the money, even if some of these plans were approved and we don't have the money to pay for it all, we don't have the testing time. The sooner we can make the decision, the sooner we can start planning, and maybe the sooner we actually can get kids back a little bit. But so I think, again, I'm going back to what you said in the press the other day, you know, plan on distance learning from day one and how we slowly get back rather than the other way around.
We have a couple of questions that we kind of already answered, and I don't have the person, I didn't write the person's name because they sent it to me directly, and I didn't write it down, so that's my fault. But the person is asking about ventilation, which I think we've touched upon already at length today. The other one is about mandated masks. Can you guys just talk about the fact that that became a topic last week, requiring masks? I don't know which one of you wants to start, but I think it's worth mentioning.
Right. I mean, masks were originally recommended, and then we pushed for, and I pushed for it certainly with RIDE in the meetings with the governor's staff, they needed to be required. Now I get that there are a few students that can't wear them. I know there's concerns about those students, some special needs students. We understand all that. Now the issue is what's going to happen to students who just refuse. And frankly, it's got to be like the Delta Airlines over the last week or whatever. The plane, 2 people refused to wear the mask, the plane turned around, those people can never fly on Delta again. It's amazing to me that there are now 100 people on that list, 100 stupid people, but they're on that list. But I can see the kid, my father says, or my mother says I don't have to wear one. Well, what's going to happen to that student? What about the time between they're sent home, etc.? But we have to, you know, masks need to be required except in health cases or a couple cases that I mentioned. And if they're not, then students need to be removed from the classroom. And that process has to be set up. Not hanging out in the nurse's office for 2 or 3 hours, and not hanging out in the room with 3 other kids that weren't going to wear the mask while teachers or staff have to rotate in to watch them. But what's the plan to remove them safely?
Turn the plane around and go back to the gate. And again, with full parental choice in these matters, how was your first day of school, Billy? Well, Susie wouldn't wear her mask. That's very interesting. What happened? The teacher took care of it. Great. If the answer is the teacher wasn't allowed to do anything about it, you're not going back to school tomorrow, Billy, until the teacher's allowed to do something about it. So the system, another way the system falls apart pretty quickly.
Larry touched upon it too when, Larry, you mentioned that if the student gets pulled out and then has to either sit in the nurse's office for a few hours, or a teacher assistant or another staff member needs to babysit, as the term was used, that student until they get picked up, which every teacher will tell you is probably not going to be in a timely fashion. And so now what? That's a portion of this issue that hasn't been touched upon.
And it kind of goes to what we've been saying all along, and that for every problem that we can come up with a solution for, it raises more problems and questions, and that's certainly one of them. I was very happy when they listened, change recommended to required, but we also have to now address for those students who refuse to. They refuse to, they can't be in school.
And in the short term, there are solutions that just cost money. If you want to go back to the daycare analogy, and you've got a group of students who are compromised, then you set up a scenario for them, and it could be external to the school day, if it's to the school setting, if it needs to be, where a small group who are tested frequently can be put together if they're all kids who, for other medical reasons, can't wear masks, and you do your best you can. I mean, it's kind of in a, we're going to have that situation in our, some of our special needs student classes. And when we get to a return, even a phased return, we're going to have to deal with that. But those students are going to have to be isolated from just about everybody else. Because there's going to be, as we've talked about, there's going to be an interim phase to this, probably. It's probably not going to go full distance to full return. There's still going to be a phased return at some point where the risk is still lingering out there.
We've phased everything else.
We phased everything else. Right. We phased everything else. Schools should at least meet the restaurant standard of phased.
You just said a mouthful right there. We have the last question, and then we'll do some final thoughts from the two of you. From Angela in North Kingstown, mentions, Bob, what you just touched on is testing. She wants to know if teachers and staff will be given a test before returning to school buildings, and would this be a condition for in-person return? Or could this be a condition for in-person?
It could be, and it's certainly certainly as we talk to members, it's high on their list that teachers, staff, and students be tested before they return. So, and again, it's a precaution going in. We, test people. What places of employment are testing people when they come in, are taking their temperature, et cetera. All that's been done. Why wouldn't we do that for schools?
It's a pretty logical conclusion. If we have the professionals in the building first before any student comes in, you have a setting where you could bring people in to test all the professionals, teachers and support professionals, the administrators and everything else before a student sets foot in the school. And then before the students come in, you could set up the same protocols.
Are we in a position to do that in Rhode Island right now? Or I should say in a month? We
don't have the full rapid turnaround in place yet. The governor has talked about, I'm very careful listening to language. She's now expanded the frame a little to 48 to 72 hours instead of 24 to 48 hours. So maybe everyone gets tested on Friday, and so you still get the results on Monday and you get to the same effect. We don't have it. We certainly don't have it to test 140,000 school children. But again, it won't matter if, it only matters when we come back. And if you were going to do a phased reopening at some point, you test those that are going to come back, so you can start limiting things, and the ones who need to be back the most would be tested and found. It's a lot. I think you said it at the beginning of the show, Stephanie, that we need a month to figure it out, and it ties into the governor would give us great relief the sooner. Please don't wait till the week. Just tell us. Just tell us. We already know. Just tell us. We're not going to open in the way you want, and that's okay, because that'll allow us to get there faster in the long run. You know,
one of the things, and I'm not comparing Rhode Island to Florida or Georgia or any of those states, because we actually have competent leadership, sane people running these things. But you can't shut out the rest of the world either. And I just look at Major League Baseball. There was a chance over the weekend they were going to shut that down because 20% of games were canceled. And these are, I know they're professional athletes, I know they're adults, but this is a group, Major League Baseball, that has billions of dollars. They could spend unlimited resources to keep everyone safe, and they couldn't do it. And their people were tested every other day. And I'd like to think that teachers, staff, and especially our students were for Major League Baseball players. So I do think we have to look at what's going on. Look at people opting out of the NFL, just if you want to use the sports world. So keeping students, staff safe, we've said all along, #1 priority. And we've all been working with the governor's office and governor herself and the Department of Ed, because we want to reopen schools and get kids back too, because we know that's best. But right now, health and safety, it's just, as the commissioner said, it's a nightmare, and I don't see how it's possible to get everyone back. And now we're giving parents the option. There's going to be more and more parents opt out. So as you said, taking the time, let's get this right.
I think that's a good close.
It's a good close. Oh, actually, there's one separate close, totally unrelated to any of this. If this was a normal year, we would have spent the whole show talking about the elections. The only thing I'm going to say about the elections is, if you want to vote absentee in the primary, you've got to get your application in by August 18th, I believe. And my recommendation is vote absentee. So download an application, send it to your board of canvassers, and you can vote from a distance, and then be prepared to do the same thing for the general election in November. You already know who to we don't have to say that.
As I say every week, links to all of the things that we're talking about will be in the video description underneath. So
There you go.
And we'll
here we
see
are,
you
another
all
weekend.
On the 12th, the night of the 12th, Wednesday.
August 12th. It's a Wednesday, 7 p.m. It's going to be Ask Larry and Bob Live. The registration link will be down below. This is for members only, and that will be verified in a process that we're going to have. So we would love to make sure that you have your questions in advance so that we can make sure that we include them. Thank you very much, you guys.
Thank you all. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Hang in there. I know.
Hang in there.
Yeah.